What's up, guys? Coming at you today with a Jeep XJ update. This is my 2000 Cherokee behind us, and recently it developed a lifter tick. So either the lifter is sticky or something's wrong with it or something along those lines, and it's been doing it for quite a while. It's been getting worse, so I decided I need to replace the lifters. And because it's a 2000 Jeep Cherokee, it's also got the head crack that is notorious in happening in 2000 XJs. If you don't know anything about the head crack in 2000 Jeep Cherokees, look it up. There's lots of information. So like I said, this is a 2000 Jeep Cherokee, also known as the XJ. Here's the motor, 4-liter straight 6. I'm going to start it up one last time here and move it into position, and I guess I will show you guys what the lifter tick sounds like. These things sort of sound like diesels. It's pretty horrible sounding, but it's not the end of the world for these motors. Now it sounds fine right now, just give it a second. Now you can hear it now. Right inside here is where the camshaft sits, and those lifters are going up and down, hitting push rods, the rocker arms up here, but you'll see all that later. But I think the lifter is sticking in one of these cylinders, probably due to the fact that the head is cracked and that sludge is leaking down into the lifter. So obviously not good things happening to my engine right now. So I got it moved over there, and you can hear that the sound is already starting to subside. That's because the lifter is getting pumped up with oil. And another way you can tell it's the lifter, not the main rod bearing, is you should be able to rev it up and hear it go away. You hear it come back at idle. Now if that was a rod bearing and I revved it up, it would be a bad sound coming from that motor. So yeah, to get the head off of here and get the lifters changed out, I've got to remove the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold, which is kind of in the same area. The valve cover, got to drain the coolant, pull the air conditioner pump out, pull these hoses, pull the spark plugs, pretty much everything attached to the top half of this motor, and then pull the head, and then wait for my new cylinder head and put things back together. I'm probably not going to record the whole way through this. If you want to know exactly how to remove the head and everything, you know, get yourself a manual. I'm not an automotive expert, but I will check in with you guys occasionally and kind of show you how things are going. Alright, update number 1. Get the battery disconnected and all the coolant hoses disconnected. Drain the coolant, obviously. Got a lot of the airbox stuff off of there. So I gotta pull the power steering, the belt, the air conditioner pump, and I don't know, maybe unplug some more wires, get the ignition off. Yeah, making progress. Alright, so the power steering pump is unhooked and set to the side. I left the lines hooked up. Same with the air conditioner pump. I just kind of unbolted it, set it to the side. And actually I didn't even need to remove the air conditioning bracket. I just loosened the bolts in the top, took those out, and I think there was one more in the bottom. Loosened the one underneath here that was like a pivot point after taking the fan off, and then the whole thing just kind of rotated to the side. Now I got a nice little gap right there. But now I got to remove the thermostat and the manifold, which is going to be the hardest part. I've got my injector wires labeled so I can remove the wiring. But yeah, like I said, everything's been going well so far, but the manifold is supposed to be the hardest part of the whole process, so yeah, that's gonna suck. Alright, so the intake manifold has been completely removed, and the exhaust manifold, you can see I left the bottom collectors hooked up and just kind of pulled it off the head here. Just kind of sitting there held in place. I did fuck up my fuel line, this metal one. It's got a pinhole leak now because where this thing actually used to attach, I don't know if it rusted in there, got some grit in there, and then I flexed it a little bit, but now it weeps gas a little bit, so that's screwed. Now I have to replace this whole stupid thing, which kind of sucks. But the intake manifold is right over here. Got that removed. The fuel rail assembly still attached. Just did the quick disconnect there and just took all the vacuum hoses off. There's the old gasket, and this is not an original gasket, so someone has definitely been in here before. So the valve cover bolts are off. Now let's see what the underneath of this thing looks like. I've probably just replaced this valve cover gasket about 1,000 miles ago, give or take, and there was milky residue under here, so I'm curious to see what it looks like now. There, I don't know if you can see inside there, but you can see the milky residue is still prevalent. That might be old stuff, might be new stuff. Either way, it's got to be cleaned out, and now I got to pull these rocker arms, which are covered in sludge. So on the valve cover, it had studs and bolts that you had to unbolt, and I wanted to make sure to get them back in the right position. So I took this piece of cardboard and poked holes in it and put the bolts in so I can remember exactly how they go together. I just got to mark the front right there. So now the valve train, you can see the ridiculous amount of sludge buildup just everywhere. And the crack I was telling you about, let me see if I can find it here. Hopefully I can get that, but right there you see a small line and there's little bits of coolant. You can see it's really clean right along that edge. That's where my crack is. And that's between the 3rd and 4th cylinder. And that is the place where they crack, either that or on this other side, but usually right around this rocker arm. The castings are just weak on year 2000 XJs, and they all do it. I don't know why, but hopefully when I get my new head, it's the heavy duty casting, and that will never happen again. But here's push rod. I'm going to clean these out, and I'll probably reuse these as well, as long as they're not bent. And the way you tell if these are bent is you take a piece of glass and you just kind of roll them back and forth on the piece of glass, and if you see them lift or wobble, you know they're bent, and then you have to replace them. So I got all the push rods out in a well organized pile, and so you can decipher top from bottom, front from back, and just look at all the sludge in this engine. It's just freaking terrible. And this is better from what it was. I sucked a lot out of here with the vacuum cleaner when I did the valve cover gasket before. But now, pulling the head bolts, and the preferred method is the 1/2-inch wrench with the cheater pipe on it. So I got the head bolts all out, except for this one back one, and here's a real genius in engineering. They put the bolt here and they put this body flange, so you can't even pull the bolt out. It's impossible. So I guess the bolt has to come out and go in with the head. The bolts I did get out, I again organized in the box because there's 3 different types of bolts. There's these ones with the studs, the regular headed ones, and then these small ones with studs. So, I mean, I'm putting new bolts in, but I at least need to know where they go when they go back in. So here's the head all pulled off, and you can see there's even more sludge buildup in where the push rods pass through. Valves are a little white, but whatever. Run it. So now that the old lifters are out, it's time to put the new ones in. You can see I got a couple stacks here of these Crown Automotive, they're aftermarket lifters. I was going to get OE, but they're like 3 times the price. So I just went with aftermarket. This thing's got 150,000 miles on it. I know people are going to give me shit about putting new lifters on an old cam, but to them I say, if you want to come replace my cam and tear the whole front end of this Jeep apart, be my guest. But I, for one, do not want to spend 3 days doing this. So I'm just going to put the lifters in on the cam and hope for the best, because it's a 4-liter and they're indestructible. Alright, so we got the whole top half of the motor cleaned up. I scraped all the old gasket off, vacuumed out all the crud, dropped in all new lifters, so those are ready to go. So the only thing I'm waiting on now is the cylinder head. I've got all the bolts, all the gaskets and everything to put this all back together. So that's pretty much where I have to leave it off today. I'm going to go ahead and cover the whole top half of this motor with tin foil and kind of seal it in there real tight so nothing gets in there. And then in a couple days when I get my new cylinder head, I'll throw the head gasket on, drop the head on, put everything back together, and we'll start it up and pray to God it doesn't explode. Alright, so a week has gone by now and I finally got my cylinder head in the mail, and I've got a lot of parts to put back together. So here's what I'm talking about. I got my new oil change stuff, some carb cleaner spray. Those lifters obviously aren't going to be going back in. Same with those head bolts. Those are my new head bolts here in the bag. Got all my intake assembly parts, my ignition, my new fuel line, which that was a $70 mistake. Don't make that mistake. Spark plugs, all my tools, my rocker arms still organized. Got my valve cover back there, valve cover bolts, intake manifold. Also got my brand new cylinder head from Clearwater, Florida, from Clearwater Cylinder Heads. They shipped this in about a week. It comes packed with brand new valves and valve springs. Like I said, it's a brand new head, not a reman, and it's a heavy duty casting. So the split between the 3rd and 4th cylinders right here should be non-existent with this heavy duty casting. Here's how I left the motor, covered in tinfoil. And it actually rained all week, so I also came out here and covered it with saran wrap because I did not want any moisture getting into my motor. But I've got to finish cleaning off the gaskets here on the exhaust manifold, as well as my intake manifold over there. And once I'm all done with that, we'll throw on the new head gasket and drop the head on there and start torquing some bolts down. So here are my two cylinder heads side by side. This is the brand new one from Clearwater, and this is the old cracked one here. And you can see the casting right where my finger is. You can see that's kind of flush and then it goes up. And on the Clearwater cylinder head, you can tell it's definitely thicker because it's actually been machined out around this groove for the head bolt. So that's obviously a thicker casting all around all these pins. So that's really, really good to see. I'm happy to see that this is, in fact, a heavier duty casting. So enough fucking around, let's get this thing put back together. So somehow I managed to remember that this back bolt has to be installed when you put the head in. And the problem was that if I just put the bolt in, it would sit all the way down and the threads would protrude from the bottom, which is obviously not good. So to fix that, I took a piece of vacuum hose and sliced it down the side as a little spacer to hold my bolt. This cylinder head weighs 85 pounds, for those of you wondering. So my cylinder head bolts are all in, and we're going to use my click torque wrench here to torque them down, and they're torqued in a very specific sequence from the center outwards, and they're done in 3 steps. The first step is 22 pounds, and then 44, and then all the way up to 110, except for this bolt, which gets a special sealant and actually gets a lower torque as well. Alright, so now we're going for the last step, step C, and this is 110 pounds of torque. Yeah! Yeah! With the push rods put back in on the new lifters, and I'm putting the rocker arms back in with white assembly grease so I can get this head sealed off and hopefully not get shit into my motor. Here's why it pays off to be organized. Now I know where all my bolts go. So we got the valve cover back on there, and I've reinstalled the studs at the front and rear of the head and reconnected some stuff over here, and there's another ground on the back there. So we're pretty much good to go to install these manifolds again. So it's time to work on that. So as you can see, our manifolds are back in place and they're torqued down. I'll tell you what, it was a lot harder to put them in than to take them out. Just because of the pressure of the exhaust pulling downward, I actually put a jack with a block of wood underneath my exhaust pipe so I didn't have to hold the manifold up while I bolted it in, which worked pretty well. But now that's pretty much the hardest stuff out of the way. Now it's just reconnecting hoses, putting my ignition back in, my spark plugs are already in, air conditioner, pump, power steering pump, I gotta replace my fuel line. So there's still quite a little bit to do, but at least the hard stuff's out of the way. So we're making progress. I got accelerator cables hooked up, wires hooked up, vacuum lines hooked up. I still have to do the power steering pump and bracket, but I've got the air conditioner pump in, the fans back in, I gotta do the shroud, all the coolant lines are hooked up, ignition's back in, everything's bolted down. Gonna have to do the power steering next, the belt, and some other stuff. So there, my engine is fully reassembled. I got the coolant put back in, I got the belt tight, all the shrouds and guards in place. I pulled the fuel pump relay, and I'm gonna turn the motor over a few times to get the oil up in the upper end, and then I'm gonna put the relay pump back in and purge the system and fire it up for the first time. Here goes. is running. No bangs yet. I can hear the lifters ticking just a tiny bit. That's probably because they got to pump up. You can see Paul came here to check out the show. Look at the smoke coming off this motor. Just unbelievable. Let's listen to the tailpipe. Doesn't sound like it's missing. Sounds good. So darkness is falling upon us. This has been running for probably 15 minutes now. Still hasn't blown up. So I think I'm going to take it for a ride. It's not leaking anything. It's not making any funny noises. So we're going to see how she goes. Let's do this. Alright, first drive in like 2 weeks. Guess I'll turn my headlights on. Here goes. Everything seems to be running pretty good. So there we go. I finished up late last night. I started at about 10 a.m. and went till about 8 o'clock. So, I mean, I had to make a couple runs, unexpected runs to the parts store to get a couple things I didn't know I needed, but we're pretty much done. I'm going to drive it a little bit more, change the oil, and keep topping off the coolant. But like I said, it's a done deal. No check engine light. It ran smooth, as you guys could see last night. So that's pretty much it. If you liked the video, if it helped you out, please rate it. It helps me out. And for more Jeep tech, you know, subscribe, and sooner or later I'll get around to doing more stuff to this thing. Thanks for watching.